Joining me on the program now, public theologian Dr. Craig Heilmann. Craig, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew. Great to talk to you.
This is such an important topic, and just wanting to say straight off, not taking anything away from the good things that are happening here, but there are some concerns, and I know particularly a couple of cases in Australia recently where people are saying, you know what, this system seems to be broken. We need to have some higher standards here.
Yeah, the government, actually all governments in Australia are looking at this, trying to create some new boundaries because, unfortunately, the foxes have been guarding the hen house, and the Reproductive Technology Accreditation Committee in Australia, who are representatives of the peak body, really, they have been essentially policing themselves in terms of what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. So this has been incredibly problematic. So there's new laws are going to come down the pipe. It's the Wild West at the moment, and it certainly doesn't pass the smell test ethically, what's been going on.
And part of this is because of the economics of it, that it is economics first and ethics is a distant, even if it gets considered at all, because there's no requirement for ethical consideration when setting up an IVF program. Yes, there's some standards, I'm sure, about, basic medical care, but there's no ethical guidelines in place.
No, and that seems to be the problem, Andrew. It's not, with that, laying aside the debate over capitalism versus communism, let's say capitalism won that fight. It doesn't mean that every part of life should be dominated by the market. And so what we're finding is a more invasive approach into all spheres of life where everything's been turned to profit. And of course, what happens then is you and I, and women particularly, get instrumentalized then to the goal of profit. And so what started out as a reproductive technique to help people with a medical issue has become essentially a product for sale. And of course, in the process, humans have become means to an end. And the end in this case is just profit. So care goes out the window and it becomes the sale of a product. And if you can get more and more people to take up the service of IVF, that just becomes part of the profit-making agenda. So you get into what we call people who are socially infertile. That is, for example, same-sex couples, or we get into people who want to have a fashion baby when they're 45-year-old female, let's say, or 50-year-old female wants to have a fashion baby, biologically unable to have that baby anymore, and so IVF kicks in. That's not what the original intention was, and it's lost its connection with the root of medical care.
Although we are doing this a little bit to ourselves with people getting married later, people wanting to have families later because they've got to go through university and then they've got to get a mortgage and pay for a house, and by the time they come up for air, biologically it's almost too late. In some ways, as a society, we've done this to ourselves, and this is part of the problem, I think, Craig, because by the time people realize actually maybe it's not all about my career, maybe it's not all about how much money I get or how many toys I can buy, maybe I would love to be a parent, by the time that penny drops, actually time has passed and biology has moved on. However, reproductive technology means that these people who are absolutely desperate, and if you ask them the question, how much money would you pay to be a father, the answer is a very large amount, so these people can charge what they like.
Absolutely, and that's what we've got. And there's so many questions that bubble up to the surface from this. Like, we've now got people suggesting our fertility rates in countries like Australia can be solved by IVF. And you're absolutely right, Andrew. The economic pressures on young people, particularly around housing and stuff, we just don't build enough houses, for example. So our house prices are through the roof. We've been through two big bubbles since the global financial crisis plus COVID. So house prices are now out of reach for a young couple. So you're right. You have to put off having children till you're much older. That raises all the problems that we're talking about, why you'd even need IVF. It's different for a 20-year-old female versus a 35-year-old female. It's just a very different part to hop over,
What are some of the problems that are coming to the surface here? What are some of the things that the politicians are scrambling to regulate? What's the dark side of all of this, Craig?
I think the dark side of all of this, Andrew, has been that people themselves, I think the biggest thing is the transformation of our mindset, where we're basically looking now at the human embryo as something that we create. And I think what's happening with that is it's going to continue to blur lines where we're going to do medical interventions for all sorts of reasons in terms of tinkering with the embryo itself. And so that's one of the problems, is that rather than human life being seen as a given, that God has given us human life and it's an incredible treasure and gift, we will be seen as the masters of that. And therefore, we will feel free to bend the rules, to twist human nature to our purposes. I mean, C.S. Lewis wrote about this in The Abolition of Man. I think it's way back in the 1930s or 40s. He was writing about the dangers of a scientifically minded elite beginning to herd and manage the human embryo and human life itself. So that's number one. We've crossed that line already, in a sense of not recognizing the creator as the gifter of life. The most dangerous, I think, expression of that is that we no longer can say precisely that in which human dignity would consist. And so much of our ethical perspective on human life now is grounded in this idea of human dignity. But if we are the masters of that, if we're the ones creating human life essentially in the test tube, or shaping it in the test tube, then our conceptions of human dignity are fundamentally changed. So these are some of the bigger issues that the governments are grappling with. Obviously, the most fundamental ones are the concrete facts that we've had cases in Australia where women have been impregnated with the wrong embryo.
Wow.
Literally, some other family's embryo has been implanted, and you're giving birth essentially to a child that is not yours ultimately. And then there's also the issues around the destruction, because to do an IVF program, to take it seriously, means you've got to have lots of fertilized eggs, right? Well, what do you do with the ones that are unwanted? Well, usually they're destroyed, There's all of these side effects, side problems that go with our IVF program. By the way, it's only about 25% successful. I think it might be as high as 29 now. It's not a fundamentally very successful program, but I agree with you that for the families it has blessed, hey, how can you argue with that? It's an amazing gift.
Exactly. And when we say it's only 25% successful, it's financially successful every single time. And actually, if people have to go through repeat treatments, then that actually is, if we're talking about products rather than people, that becomes a very lucrative financial model. And hey, this is not a criticism of anybody involved in this particular work. I know there's good people there for good motivation. But Craig, I think for people that have managed to become parents, whether that has involved IVF or not, I think regardless of whether or not you have a faith, you recognize the miraculous in it. Something absolutely amazing that you cannot even describe has happened through the growth and birth of this baby. And actually, I think we're at risk of losing the spiritual or even the sacred aspect of fertility when we just monetize it and say, hey, here's the products that we've got for sale, stack them high and sell them cheap.
No, that's exactly right. And Andrew, we know, I mean, from being fathers ourselves, I couldn't explain some of the changes that happened to me personally when I had, we had our three boys, but I remember being changed by the experience of every one of them coming. I sort of understand it better now scientifically. I mean, your testosterone levels are adjusted as a man. Your testosterone's quite high before you have your first child. Funny enough, it sort of ameliorates over time. The more children you have, the more it ameliorates. And what it does is takes a man from that sort of aggressive, rah-rah, I'm charging at life model to being, I want to be a father, I want to be a coach, I want to be a mentor. And it makes you more relational in the end. And so there's this beauty and wonder that God has created and structured these things incredibly. And that's something of what goes missing in the medicalization process, I think.
And hey, amazing to recognize God's design and all of that. But before we get into the process of a couple of blokes explaining the fertility process to women,
exactly,
because then we're in a lot of trouble. Craig, thank you for your insight on this very important matter. Thanks for drawing this to our attention, and thanks for joining us again.
God bless, mate. Great to talk.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.